I think you all know that I've always felt the 9 most terrifying words in the English language are, "I'm from the government and I'm here to help."
With those words, Ronald Reagan ushered in a new era of American politics, one built on the promise of prosperity, individual freedom, and economic expansion. But behind the rhetoric was a policy shift that would fundamentally alter the country's trajectory, laying the groundwork for deep inequality, financial instability, and a government increasingly unable to meet the needs of its people. Welcome to American Ruin, the unraveling in 3 acts. This is Act 1, the opening. To understand Reagan's vision, we need to look at what came before. The recession of 1969 to 1970 marked the end of the post-war economic boom and the beginning of a more turbulent era for the American economy, lasting from December 1969 to November 1970. This downturn was triggered by rising inflation, aggressive Fed policy, and the financial strain of funding both the Vietnam War and President Johnson's Great Society. As interest rates climbed to curb inflation, consumer spending slowed, manufacturing output declined, and unemployment rose to 6%. Though relatively mild compared to later recessions, it exposed the limits of sustained government spending and foreshadowed the economic challenges of the 1970s, including the emergence of stagflation. Amid this uncertainty, corporate leaders grew increasingly concerned about what they saw as a hostile political and cultural environment. In 1971, corporate lawyer Lewis Powell, soon to be appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court, responded to these anxieties with a confidential memorandum to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce. Powell warned that the American free enterprise system was under attack from progressive activists, consumer advocates, and what he viewed as anti-business sentiment in the media and academia. More than a critique, the Powell memo was a call to arms, outlining a battle plan for corporations to influence the media, universities, and politics. That same year, in 1971, a group of activists led by David Nolan founded the Libertarian Party. Frustrated by President Nixon's economic policies, especially wage and price controls, and abandoning the gold standard, they sought a political home for their vision of minimal government and individual freedom. By 1973, the economy worsened with the OPEC oil shock. After the U.S. supported Israel in the Yom Kippur War, Arab oil producers imposed an oil embargo. Oil prices quadrupled, driving up fuel costs and triggering severe inflation. This crisis shattered the post-war economic consensus and heightened public anxiety.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
In 1974, Richard Nixon resigned after the Watergate scandal. His fall deepened public distrust in government, creating an opening for ideas that questioned state power. Meanwhile, the economy continued to struggle throughout the 1970s, with high inflation, energy crises, and weak growth fueling a sense of national decline. These conditions helped pave the way for the rise of neoliberalism, a market-oriented ideology favoring deregulation, privatization, and tax cuts. Think tanks and business interests, inspired by the Powell memo, aggressively promoted these ideas. By 1980, this shift culminated in the election of Ronald Reagan, who promised to shrink government and revive the economy. Reagan ran on a simple idea: cut taxes, unleash the free market, and let capitalism work its magic. For a nation reeling from economic hardship, the message resonated. In 1981, one of Reagan's first major acts was signing the Economic Recovery Tax Act, slashing the top marginal tax rate from 70% to 50% and eventually down to 28%. For the wealthy, this was a windfall. For the rest of the country, it marked the beginning of a long decline. But Reaganomics wasn't just about lowering taxes. It was about dismantling the role of government. Social programs were gutted, and labor unions, once a major force in securing worker protections, were targeted. When air traffic controllers went on strike in 1981, Reagan fired over 11,000 workers, sending a clear message. Organized labor had no place in the new economy. Meanwhile, deregulation opened the floodgates for corporate greed. Banks and corporations were given more freedom than ever. Profits soared, but so did instability. By the late 1980s, the savings and loan industry collapsed, costing taxpayers billions. And those tax cuts? They didn't pay for themselves. The national debt tripled under Reagan, transforming the U.S. from the world's largest creditor nation to its largest debtor. But the wealthy benefited, and that was the point. The repeal of the Fairness Doctrine on August 4, 1987, fundamentally reshaped American media by removing the requirement for broadcasters to present controversial issues in a balanced manner. The FCC justified its decision by arguing that the growing number of media outlets made the rule unnecessary and that its enforcement could hinder free speech. This shift allowed broadcasters to take more overtly partisan stances, contributing to the rise of ideologically driven news and the polarization of political discourse. While critics warned that the change would deepen divisions and reduce the diversity of viewpoints on mainstream channels, supporters saw it as a victory for free expression, enabling media companies to operate without government constraints. The decision set the stage for the highly fragmented and opinion-driven news landscape that defines modern broadcasting. For regular Americans, the dream was slipping away. Manufacturing jobs disappeared, wages stagnated, and a new economic reality emerged, one where financial speculation was rewarded while actual work paid less and less. By the time Reagan left office in 1989, his vision had been realized. America had fully embraced neoliberalism. Government was smaller, corporations were stronger, and inequality was rising. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was just the opening act.